And now our speaker, Caitlyn Perry-Dial.
No? All right. Oh, now you can hear me, and I can hear myself. Well, thank you so much. First, I just want to thank you for the invitation to speak today. This is something that is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and something that, to give you a little background on me, before I sort of dove into the world of libraries, I was the executive director of the Michigan Women's Historical Center and Hall of Fame, like just over 10 years ago. So I really got into this story of how Michigan women won the vote. And it's more than just the history of this period in time, it's a story of resilience. And I have to tell you, in 2016, when I was the director of the Hall of Fame, I got a call the day after the election in 2016 from the Detroit Free Press, and I was asked how I was feeling and how the museum was feeling, because we were on the precipice of having the first woman president, and then it didn't happen. And so what I told the Free Press, instead of my true feelings that day, which was devastation, I told them the story of how Michigan women won the vote. And it was not easy, it was long, and it's really, if you think about it, still over. So let's get started. So Michigan has a unique story. Oh, all right, let me go back a little bit. I don't think this is working, because this is not the first slide. Can you go back all the way to the first slide, please? This is not working. There we go. All right. Now let's see if I can advance it. There we go. Michigan's unique story. So this image is from the Michigan State Fair in 1912. The tent says on the outside, "The law says criminals, idiots, insane, children, and women cannot vote. Help your mother, wife, daughter, sister, and sweetheart of this by voting." So I have to remind you, at this time, only men can vote. And to get women the right to vote, it had to be men who said yes, they could. And so this goes to a ballot initiative, many times, actually. And in this period of time, there is such a strong suffrage movement at this time that women and men are appearing at different fairs to convince their peers that women deserved the right to vote, that women were equal citizens. Another sign says, "Women vote in 6 states. Why not Michigan?" Those 6 states were all west of the Mississippi. Does anyone know why? Because it was the easiest path to statehood. You could immediately double your electorate by allowing women the right to vote. So Michigan was trying to be one of the first states east of the Mississippi to allow their women to vote. So during this time, you have to remember, there's also a lot of fear about women voting, because there's this sort of theory that men lived in the public sphere, outside the home, they worked outside the home, they voted in government, they did all those things. Women were the masters of the private sphere. They were the masters of the home, their children, taking care of the things at home. So to have women out in public like that, there was a big fear that, well, then who will take care of the home if there are no women there? So just to get you into this thought of how things are going. Let's see, I'm going to try to... Can you advance the slide for me, please? Thank you. So during this time, we're going to jump many, many years into the past, even more, that the Michigan suffrage movement was actually started right around the time that Michigan became a state. around 1846, around the same time that there is a national suffrage movement. So we're right along the same path as the national suffrage movement. And in 1848, there is the Seneca Falls Convention, where many women, this you may recall from your history lessons, that many women get together in Seneca Falls, New York, and they come up with the Declaration of Sentiment. This Declaration of Sentiment basically says, women do not have the right to vote. And these are quotes. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. They also stated that married women came under the control of their husband. Quote, he has made her, if married in the eye of the law, civilly dead. They also stated husband has control of the profits wife earns in property. Quote, he has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she earns. Again, husband is the wife's master and compared it to slavery. Quote, promise obedience to her husband, he becoming to all intents and purposes her master, the law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement, so physical abuse. So this is sort of this declaration, these women coming together, like these are the things that we are identifying. And so many of these women, they're coming, and this is, they're coming to Michigan to spread some of these words. Even before Seneca Falls, we have this woman right here, Ernestine Rose, in 1846. She comes and she speaks at the state legislature in Lansing, and gives a similar statement of the Declaration of Sentiment, talking to legislators, male legislators. And her speech is so powerful at the Capitol that they invite her to come back. So I'm just setting the stage here of what this was like here in the state of Michigan. So who are our players here? Can you advance the slide for me, please? Other direction. Thank you. One of our most notable suffragists was Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth, after she declared her own freedom, she settled in Battle Creek in the 1850s with her children. She lived here in Michigan, and she traveled the country, spreading the word about freedom, women's rights, and the inalienable sort of right to these. She continued her advocacy, including for women's suffrage, and her powerful orations and her personal history as a formerly enslaved woman gave her a unique and influential voice in her fight for equality. Her most famous speech, called Ain't I a Woman, was delivered in Ohio. Her continued work and presence contributed to the momentum of the women's rights movement, which included suffrage across the nation and in Michigan. So we're going to jump 70 years ahead. That's okay. I'll read what I have on my slide. We have 70 years of major social reform that happens from the 1850s moving on ahead into the 20th century. If you think about it, these are all around women and women's bodies, but these are all controlled by them. There's dress reform, the abolition of slavery, temperance, sanitation reform, healthcare reform. There's also the women's club movement and workplace reform. And this is largely coming out of women in their church groups. Because if you think about it, in the private sphere, the only way that they can really advocate for their communities is through their churches and their church groups. So what do we come out of it? There is sanitation. We need to clean up the streets. We need playgrounds. We need to get our kids out of playing out of the streets. We also need to keep our kids in school. So let's try to convince our legislators to pass laws that keep our kids in schools and out of the workplace. So these are things that are all happening, all without women having the right to vote. Can you advance the slide, please? But what is Michigan like at this time? It's largely rural and it's largely agrarian. It's a relatively new state, and railroads are quickly spreading across the state. Advance the slide, please. But there's also this big fear of women's suffrage. These are actually postcards from the women's suffrage movement that says, I like this one right here to the left that says, I want to vote, but my wife won't let me. Here's the suffragette Madonna. The suffragette vote getting, easiest way, sort of making fun that if women are allowed to run for office, they'll just kiss men for votes. And then here is a cross-dressing Uncle Sam, because if women get the right to vote, what's going to happen to Uncle Sam? Gosh. Next slide, please. Here are some images. This one in particular to the right is a political cartoon. And if you see, there's the woman holding the Votes for Women flag over this cliff of politics. So this black water here is politics, and here she is looking off into the cliff, and there are her children holding her skirts, being like, Mommy, no, please don't. And there's her mother in the background reaching for her, like, what have I done? And then there's the husband with his crossed arms saying, oh no. The pity of it. There was a large group called the Michigan Opposed to Women's Suffrage that was formed in 1913. And they believed the vote would damage a woman's femininity since voting is a man's duty. In terms of time, I'll go quickly over these next slides. Could you advance the slide for me, please? So the new departure, we're going to jump back into the 1870s into really what was the push. In 1870s, after the Declaration of Sentiment, suffrage really hits the ground running here in the state of Michigan. And we have many different players that come up to the forefront. We have Nanette Gardner of Detroit and Catherine Stebbins, who is also from Detroit. And they attempt to vote, because as taxpayers, they believed that they were getting taxed without representation. So Catherine, or it was actually Nanette. Nanette was a widow. She owned her husband's property at his death, and so she went and she voted and was fined because that was illegal. However, as she went to court over this, the court found that she was within her rights, that yes, she was being taxed without representation. So she was allowed to vote in a municipal election. Her friend, Catherine, who also owned her own property and voted in the same election, she was denied the right to vote in that municipal election because she was still married, even though she owned property. The judge said that she could not vote because her husband represented her interests. So, boo there. Next slide, please. Oh, another one, sorry. Lottie Wilson Jackson. So she is another suffragist. We're going to jump ahead to 1899, and this is the second to the last day of the National American Woman Suffrage Association Convention in Grand Rapids. And Lottie, who is a Black woman, from Bay City, but also Niles, Michigan. She speaks at this convention for the rights of her Black sisters to ride in the same cars as white women. Because she figured, along with her Black sisters that were there at this convention, that we are fighting for the same rights. We are all fighting for the right to vote. But why not also the right to exist in the same spaces? And however, as some of you may know, during the suffrage movement, there is a loud argument about civil rights, especially for those of color. And many of the white suffragist women they exclaim, and they made a resolution at this convention, that we are only going to focus on one thing, and that's the right to vote. We'll deal with civil rights later. And so it read, Lottie wanted to pass this resolution that said, resolved that colored women ought not to be compelled to ride in smoking cars, and that suitable accommodations should be provided to them. Although her resolution was met with a passionate opposition, and Kentucky suffragist Laura Clay took it as an insult against Southern suffragists and dismissed the resolution as irrelevant to the cause and therefore inappropriate. Next slide, please. Now, this is Clara Arthur. Clara Arthur, she's the big player here in Michigan. And she really, this is when we get to the elections of 1912 and 1913, when the suffrage movement really hits on the gas here in the state. She is a club woman. She is the master of working within the private sphere for public interests. So what wealthy and well-to-do women would do is form clubs. Clubs for different things, for the playground movement, for the bathhouse. And that's what Clara did. She was called the mother of the playground movement. Some of the very first playgrounds in Detroit were because of her and her peers developing vacant land into playgrounds for kids so that they would stop playing near rail cars. She also helped develop the first public bathhouse or swimming pool, among other things. But one of the big things that she did was form a committee out of her own kitchen to fight for the right to vote. There's a quote from another woman about the movement that Clara leads. Quote, if the women of Michigan do all they plan to do, there will be no need of equal suffrage after November 5th, for the women will all be dead. So we get to the election of 1912. And what happens is there's an announcement that suffrage for women will finally go to a ballot initiative, much like our proposals that we have on the ballot nearly every election. The proposal, I don't know if it was a number one or whatever it was, but the suffrage proposal was going to be on the ballot in November 1912. And all of these women get together, they form societies, and they form their campaigns. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Lucia Grimes. She is a friend of Clara Arthur and is really her right-hand woman, I should say. She is the chair of the Michigan branch of the National Women's Party, VP and purchasing agent for Grimes Molding Machine Company, which was owned by her husband. She founded the Wayne County Republican Women's Club, and she's the first chair of the Legislative Council of Michigan Women. So she's a busy woman, much like myself. But the thing that Lucia is most noted for is she develops what's called the pressure system, or what we know today as lobbying. This image right here of this card catalog system, she comes up with a system of writing down on cards every legislator in the state of Michigan, their names, their wives' names, their children's names, their financial position, properties they own, businesses they run, basically the modern internet on 3x5 cards. And they use this information by going to every single legislator to share why it's important to pass suffrage, to support suffrage. This system is so impactful and successful that the National Women's Party invite her to go to Washington, D.C. and implement the same system there for all of Congress. Next slide, please. This is her daughter, Emily. Emily was 5 years old when she went with her mother to D.C. And this is her and her suffrage sash getting ready to march in a parade. Grimes later said it took her about 5 weeks to implement it in DC. Next slide, please. This is an image of the Michigan Suffrage Campaign headquarters in 1912. they had less than 6 months to prepare by rallying all their troops. And this is an image of their offices in Grand Rapids. Although they rallied, they put on a good campaign to educate voters on the logic of granting women's suffrage. The biggest allies to them were farmers. Does anyone know why? Because farmers knew the value of women's work. Farmers knew that though they may be working in the fields, the women were too. They were also taking care of the home. That even in the Grange, this was a sort of union system club for farmers that's still active today. But if you look at the Grange seal that has been around for hundreds of years now, it's a circle. One half are images of men at work on different parts of the field. The other half are women in their work in the fields and in the home. So the Grange was a powerful ally for these women. So they hit it hard. They even started a group for in support of men's group to support women's suffrage at this time. They passed a petition to convince others, and the monster petition, so Clara Arthur runs this out of her house. The monster petition, as they called it, was signed by 138,000 men in support of women's suffrage, which is a massive number for 1920. Move ahead. Here is a clip from November 9th, 1912. Michigan equal suffrage victory. Equal suffrage has carried the day in Michigan, and 600,000 votes have been added to the electorate of the state as a result. However, this is our Dewey versus Truman headline. It's not true. What ends up happening is one of the groups that is fully against women's suffrage is actually the booze lobby. Does anyone know why? Because women wanted temperance. They wanted to ban alcohol. And they felt that if women got the right to vote, then there goes their whole industry. Because what do we know what happens later? Prohibition. So they were kind of right. But what ends up happening is after this election, the people who are against suffrage for women immediately call for a recall. It's a nightmare. And what ends up happening is there is a recount, and suffrage loses by 760 votes. It is gut-wrenching for those women who worked so hard and for so long, and they don't understand what happened. However, they find that votes go missing, ballot boxes were destroyed before the recount, and so there's a lot of not great stuff happening here. Next slide, please. So suffrage is beaten by a 760 majority. It's just absolutely devastating. And when I talked to the Free Press guy after the election, I told him this part. I said, I feel today probably not half as bad as the women who fought for this did in 1912. So what happens? Let's go ahead. They do a sort of a post-mortem, and they try to figure out what happened. And they know we got to work harder. Let's put it back on the ballot in April 1913. And they do. They say, let's vote again. But who can tell me what is happening in April here in Michigan? What are the farmers doing? They're planting. What's the weather like in April? We don't know. It could be raining, it could be snowing, it could be hot, it could be very, very cold. What ends up happening is it gets defeated again in April 1913 because the farmers don't show up. They're busy. It's also terrible weather. So even people who aren't farming just don't make it to the polls. And it loses again even by a worse margin. Next slide, please. 96,000. 760 votes to 96,000. It is not good. Not good at all. Next slide, please. However, I skip many, many years into the future, and in between 1913 and 1917, what's happening in not just Michigan, the United States? World War I. So the suffrage movement doesn't just die, it goes away for a little while. But in that time period, we have women leaving the home to work because their sons and husbands are off to war. It gets a little bit easier to imagine women outside the home during this time. And so Michigan Governor Albert Sleeper, a longtime supporter of women's suffrage, signs the Damon Flowers Bill. So instead of a ballot initiative, it actually goes through a bill in the Michigan legislature. And it's one of my favorite stories is because there's a big debate that's happening on the floor about women's suffrage over this bill. And I'll just read my notes here. In the Detroit Free Press, the drama of the House during the debate is described. Quote, "There were notable converts to the cause of women's suffrage. The most prominent of these, and incidentally the cause of the best joke at this session, was Representative Bill Martz of Detroit, who up to a few days ago has been the most pronounced and irreconcilable opponent of women's suffrage in the House. Half a dozen members had voted no, announcing that they would explain their vote when Martz, in that booming voice that is famous for its tremendous power, roared, 'I vote aye, and I can't explain my vote.' Astonished silence followed the echo of Martz's roar. Then the house and galleries burst into applause. The real reason for Martz's conversion sat within 3 feet of him, smiling happily. Her name is Mrs. Martz." Michigan is one of the first states east of the Mississippi to allow women to vote in statewide elections before the 19th Amendment is passed. However, just 2 years later, in March 1919, women are able to vote for the first time in those statewide offices. Then, just a few months later, Michigan is one of the first 3 states to ratify the 19th Amendment on June 10th, 1919. Then just a few months later, in August 1919, the 19th Amendment is ratified by the required number of states. And on November 2nd, 1920, women all across America can vote for president. Next slide. Victory at last. However, the story is not over. We still have a whole lot more work to do because immediately after this, suffragists who are fighting for that right to vote maybe want to, we're missing some stuff there on that slide. Anyway, it says the story is not over. Women immediately call for the Equal Rights Amendment. They introduce language that basically states, next slide, please. Oh, that slide's not up there. Well, I have a very nice picture of our First Lady from Michigan, Betty Ford, and I'll just read you the Equal Rights Amendment. "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." And I will tell you, we have enough states to ratify this as the 28th Amendment, and it is currently sitting in the Library of Congress waiting to be filed. But the archivist of the United States will not file it to be our 28th Amendment. So the work is still not done. We will get there. But I just want to say thank you. And remember this as a story of resilience, that the work is not over, and that even when we're down, we're going to get back up, and we're going to keep going. So thank you.